In the ancient heart of the continent, where the horizon is painted in shades of burnt orange and violet, there lay the village of Oru. Oru was not just any settlement. It was a sanctuary built upon the banks of the Great Azure River, a body of water so vast and deep that the elders claimed it held the memories of the world within its currents. The people of Oru were masters of the water, their lives dictated by the rising and falling of the tides. To them, the river was a god, a provider and a judge. It was said that the river knew the weight of a person's heart the moment their shadow touched the surface. Among these people lived a young maiden named Nia, an orphan whose spirit was as clear as the morning dew on a lotus leaf. Nia was not like the other girls in the village. While her peers obsessed over the finest glass beads and the most colorful silk wraps, Nia found her joy in the rhythm of the ripples. She possessed a gift that was both beautiful and frightening to those who did not understand it. Nia could sing to the fish. When she sat upon the mossy stones at the water's edge and hummed a low, melodic tune, the water would begin to churn with life. Silver-scaled tilapia, golden carp and ancient mudfish would gather at her feet, dancing in synchronized circles as if paying homage to a queen. Because of Nia's song, the village of Oru never knew the hollow ache of hunger. She ensured that every net was full and every belly was satisfied, yet she asked for nothing in return. However, shadows often grow where the light is brightest. Nia lived under the roof of her stepmother, a woman named Zina, whose heart was as dry as a desert bone. Zina had 2 daughters of her own, Kura and Mala. These 2 sisters were the mirror image of their mother's bitterness. They spent their days lounging in the shade, watching Nia toil under the hot sun, cleaning scales and mending nets with fingers that never tired. The source of their deepest hatred, however, was not just Nia's beauty or her magical voice. It was the attention of Prince Kofi, the son of the great chief. Kofi was a man of honor, and he had eyes only for the girl who spoke the language of the river. He saw in Nia a soul that could lead their people with wisdom, and this was a reality the sisters could not accept. It is truly fascinating how a story born in a small village like Oru can resonate with people across the globe. Just as the Great Azure River flows through different territories, the English language has become a bridge that connects us all, regardless of the land we call home. It is used in so many countries, each bringing its own flavor to the words. I find myself wondering about the journey this story is taking right now. From which corner of the world are you watching this? Is it the bustling streets of a city or a quiet town like Oru? Please, share your country in the comments. I would love to know where our community gathers today. Back in the village, the envy of the sisters began to fester like a wound. Every time Prince Kofi brought a gift of wild honey or rare feathers to Nia, Kura and Mala would whisper poisonous lies into the ears of the villagers. They claimed Nia was using dark sorcery to enchant the fish, and that her song was actually a curse that would eventually turn the river against them. "She is not one of us," Kura would hiss to the elders. "She is a water witch, stealing the river's favor for herself." But Nia remained silent, her only defense being her kindness. She continued to feed those who mocked her and smile at those who whispered behind her back. She believed that the river would always protect its own, unaware that the darkest storm was not brewing in the sky, but in the hearts of her own kin. The atmosphere in Oru began to change as the great festival of the first catch approached. This was the time when the prince would choose his bride, and the rivalry reached a boiling point. Nia, despite her poverty, had a radiance that no amount of gold could buy. Her skin shimmered like polished bronze, and her eyes held the depth of the deepest pools. The sisters knew that if Nia appeared at the festival, the prince would surely offer her the royal necklace. They spent their nights huddled in the dark, plotting a way to silence the song of the maiden forever. They decided that Nia's connection to the river would be her undoing. If she loved the water so much, they reasoned, then the water should keep her. The plan was set for the night of the crimson moon, a time when the river was at its most turbulent and the spirits were said to be most active. Nia, ever trusting, noticed the sudden change in her sister's behavior. They began to speak to her with honeyed tongues, inviting her to join them for a secret ritual at the river's edge to bless the fish before the festival. Nia, wanting nothing more than peace in her home, agreed to follow them. She did not see the silver daggers hidden in their eyes, or the way their hands trembled with murderous intent. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in blood-red hues, the three girls walked toward the forbidden bend of the river, where the currents were known to swallow even the strongest swimmers. Nia walked at the front, humming her song, leading herself toward a trap that had been laid with the bricks of jealousy and the mortar of hate. The moon that rose over the village of Oru that night was unlike any the elders had seen in a generation. It was a heavy, bloated orb, stained with a deep, unsettling crimson that mirrored the color of an open wound. The air was unnervingly still, devoid of the usual chirping of crickets or the distant calls of night birds. Even the trees seemed to pull their branches inward, as if trying to shrink away from the tragedy that was about to unfold. Nia walked ahead of her sisters, her simple cotton wrap fluttering in the slight breeze that rose from the water. In her hands, she carried a small basket of sacred herbs and dried petals, believing she was going to perform a blessing that would bring prosperity to everyone in the village, including those who had treated her with such cruelty. Behind her, Kura and Mala exchanged glances that were sharp enough to cut through the darkness. Their hearts were no longer human. They had become vessels for a cold, calculating malice. They led Nia to the Devil's Throat, a section of the Great Azure River, where the water compressed between jagged volcanic rocks, creating a whirlpool that never slept. It was a place forbidden by the chief and feared by the fishermen, for it was said that anything that fell into the throat was taken directly to the world of the forgotten. "Here, Nia," Kura whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the adrenaline of her betrayal. "The elders say the oldest fish sleep beneath these rocks. If you sing to them here, the prince will see a harvest of silver tomorrow that will make him the richest king in history." Nia hesitated, looking down at the churning black water. The river seemed to be growling, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in her chest. For the first time in her life, the water felt alien to her. "It feels angry tonight, sisters," Nia said softly, her amber eyes reflecting the blood-red moon. "Perhaps we should wait for the dawn. The spirits are restless." But Mala stepped forward, placing a deceptive hand on Nia's shoulder. "Are you afraid, little songbird? After all the times you claimed the river was your mother? Do it for the village, do it for Kofi." The mention of the prince's name was the final tether. Nia took a deep breath, stepped onto the very edge of the slippery, moss-covered rock, and closed her eyes. She began to sing. It was a song of ancient longing, a melody that sought to soothe the turbulent heart of the water. But as the first high note left her throat, she felt a violent dual shove against her back. Kura and Mala had struck with the synchronized force of two predators. Nia's scream was short-lived, cut off by the icy, suffocating embrace of the Devil's Throat. The water didn't just take her, it slammed her against the stones and dragged her down into the spinning darkness. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the empty air, seeing for one final second the silhouettes of her sisters standing on the cliff, watching her disappear without a hint of remorse. They waited until the bubbles stopped rising, until the river returned to its rhythmic growl, and then they turned away, laughing into the crimson night. In a community, just as in the flow of a river, our strength lies in how we support one another against the tides of darkness. If Nia's courage and the shocking betrayal she faced are moving your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Your support is the current that allows us to keep bringing these powerful stories of justice and wonder to light. By joining us, you make sure that the voices of the innocent are always heard, no matter how deep they are buried. Now, let us return to the cold depths where the sisters believed Nia's story had ended. As Nia sank, the coldness was absolute. The pressure in her ears was like the weight of 1,000 stones, and the darkness began to swirl with strange, flickering lights. She felt her lungs burning, a desperate fire in a world of ice. But then, something miraculous happened. The river did not break her body against the rocks. Instead, thousands of tiny, glowing fish, the very ones she had fed and sung to for years, began to swarm around her. They formed a shimmering silver net, cushioning her fall and guiding her away from the jagged edges of the underwater caverns. They moved as one mind, one body, a living shield of scales and light. Nia felt her consciousness fading, but she was aware of a change in the water. It was no longer black and suffocating. It was becoming clear, infused with an inner radiance that smelled of lilies and ancient ozone. The fish were singing back to her now, a vibration she felt in her very bones. They were carrying her deeper, past the world of men, past the reach of sunlight, toward a place where the laws of the surface did not apply. On the shore above, the crimson moon finally set, replaced by a grey, ash-like dawn. The sisters returned to the village with torn clothes and fake tears, wailing that Nia had slipped and been claimed by the current. The village wept, and Prince Kofi sat by the banks in a silence that felt like death. They all believed Nia was gone, a victim of the water she loved. They had no idea that beneath the waves a transformation was beginning that would change the destiny of Oru forever. The world of the surface, with its biting winds and the harsh heat of the sun, was now nothing more than a fading memory for Nia. As she drifted deeper into the abyss, the crushing pressure that should have ended her life transformed into a gentle, rhythmic pulse. The silver fish that had rescued her did not let go. They wove themselves into a luminous cocoon, providing her with a magical air that allowed her to breathe the liquid essence of the river. Suddenly, the narrow tunnels of the Devil's Throat opened into a vast underwater cathedral. This was the kingdom of the submerged, a place of bioluminescent coral towers that reached toward the surface like frozen lightning, and gardens of swaying sea anemones that glowed in every shade of indigo and emerald imaginable. At the center of this shimmering realm sat a throne carved from a single massive pearl. Seated upon it was the spirit of the Great Azure River, a being whose skin was the color of a stormy sea, and whose hair moved like long silken strands of kelp. The spirit's eyes were not like human eyes. They were swirling vortices of water that saw through flesh and bone, straight into the architecture of the soul. As the school of fish delivered Nia to the foot of the throne, she knelt, her rags transformed by the water into a dress of translucent scales. She was terrified, yet she felt a profound sense of peace. "The songbird of Oru has finally come home," the spirit spoke, and the voice was not a sound but a vibration that resonated in Nia's very marrow. "I was betrayed, Great Spirit," Nia whispered, her voice bubbling into soft, musical notes. "My sisters pushed me into the darkness because they hated the love I had for this water." The spirit leaned forward, its gaze heavy with a mixture of sorrow and ancient justice. "We know, daughter of the earth. We heard your scream and felt the blood-red moon's corruption. But the kingdom of the waves does not accept just any guest. To wear our protection, you must prove that your heart was not blackened by the betrayal. If you harbor the same hate as your sisters, the river will truly claim you. If you hold on to your purity, the river will crown you." The test began immediately. Nia was led to the mirror of truth, a pool of water within the water that showed not her reflection, but her most painful memories. She saw Kura and Mala laughing as she sank. She saw the prince she loved mourning her death, his face aged by grief. She saw the villagers, led by her stepmother, celebrating the fact that the water witch was gone. The spirit watched her closely. Nia felt a surge of hot, stinging anger. She wanted to see the village flood. She wanted to see her sisters gasp for air as she had. But then she remembered the small children she fed and the elderly who relied on her songs. She realized that hate was a heavy stone that would only make her sink faster. With a deep spiritual sigh, Nia let the anger go. She chose to forgive, not because her sisters deserved it, but because her soul deserved peace. As her resentment dissolved, the mirror of truth shattered into a million pearls, which then drifted toward her and embedded themselves into her clothing. The spirit of the river stood and smiled, a gesture that caused the surrounding coral to bloom in vibrant pinks. "You have passed the trial of the heart, Nia. You did not let their darkness become yours. Now you shall see what happens to a land that rejects its most precious gift. While you learn the secrets of the deep, Oru shall learn the price of its silence." For months Nia remained in the underwater kingdom. She was taught the ancient songs that controlled the tides and the secret language of the crustaceans. She learned that every drop of water was a library of history. While she mastered these powers, the world above was suffering a terrible fate. Back in the village of Oru, The Great Azure River had turned stagnant and grey. The fish had vanished completely, as if they had followed Nia into the depths. The once clear water now tasted of ash and bitterness. The crops withered, and the people began to grow weak. Prince Kofi spent his days staring at the devil's throat, refusing to marry either Kura or Mala, for he felt in his heart that a great crime had been committed against the balance of nature. Kura and Mala, despite their newfound status as the most eligible maidens, found no joy in their victory. Every time they looked at the river, they saw Nia's amber eyes staring back at them from the ripples. They grew thin and paranoid, their beauty fading as quickly as the village's prosperity. They had murdered the girl who called the fish, and in doing so, they had murdered the lifeblood of their people. The sisters tried to sing to the river as Nia had done, but their voices were harsh and discordant. The water only responded with mud and rot. The spirit of the river was waiting, and Nia was preparing. She was no longer the orphan girl in rags. She was becoming a force of nature, a queen of the currents, who was almost ready to rise and demand a reckoning. The day of the great memorial had arrived in the village of Oru. It had been exactly 1 year since the tragic night of the crimson moon, when Nia was whispered to have been lost to the unforgiving currents. The village was a shadow of its former self. The vibrant marketplace was silent, and the ribs of the children poked through their skin like the hulls of forgotten shipwrecks. The Great Azure River, once a sapphire jewel of life, had retreated from its banks, leaving behind only cracked mud and the smell of decay. Prince Kofi stood at the edge of the devil's throat, holding a single withered lotus flower. He intended to drop it into the water as a final goodbye before his father, the chief, forced him to choose a wife to secure a new alliance for the starving tribe. Kura and Mala stood behind the prince, dressed in expensive silks that hung loosely on their skeletal frames. They were desperate to conclude the ceremony so they could finally claim the prince's hand and the safety of the royal granaries. "It is time, Kofi," Kura urged, her voice sounding like dry parchment rubbing together. "The girl is long gone. The river has moved on, and so must we. Give her to the depths so we can begin the wedding feast." Kofi didn't answer. He looked at the stagnant water, his heart heavy with a suspicion he couldn't prove. He felt that the soul of Oru had died the moment Nia disappeared. Little did he know that the river was not dead. It was merely holding its breath, waiting for the command of its new sovereign. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. A low rhythmic thumping started deep beneath the earth, like a giant drum being played at the bottom of the world. The stagnant grey water of the river began to churn, but it wasn't the chaotic splashing of a storm. It was organized. It was intentional. From the center of the devil's throat, a massive pillar of crystal-clear water erupted, shooting 50 feet into the air. The villagers fell back in terror, screaming that the river spirits had come to finish them off. But as the spray cleared, the screaming stopped. A silence so profound fell over Oru that you could hear the heartbeat of a bird in the trees. Thousands of golden and silver fish were leaping from the water, weaving their bodies together to form a shimmering living bridge from the center of the river to the shore. Then she emerged. Walking upon the bridge of fish with a steady, regal pace was Nia. But this was not the Nia they remembered. She was no longer a girl of rags and sorrow. She was a vision of celestial power. Her skin glowed with a soft blue bioluminescence, and her hair, once braided with simple twine, was now a flowing mane of dark silk, adorned with glowing pearls and rare black coral. She wore a gown made of iridescent scales that shifted colors with every step, from deep violet to shimmering turquoise. Most shocking of all was the crown upon her head, a circlet of pure white sea glass that radiated a light so bright it hurt to look at. She looked like a goddess who had stepped out of the dreams of the ancestors. Kura and Mala turned as white as ghosts, their knees buckling beneath them. "It's a spirit!" Mala shrieked, clutching her mother's arm. "She's come to take us to the grave!" The villagers watched in awe as Nia reached the shore. With every step she took on the dry land, the dead grass turned green, and the withered flowers bloomed in an instant. The air itself seemed to freshen, losing its scent of rot and filling with the perfume of blooming jasmine and wet earth. Prince Kofi dropped the withered lotus, his eyes filling with tears of disbelief and joy. "Naya," he whispered, his voice cracking. Is it truly you, or has the grief finally broken my mind? Nia stopped a few paces from him, her gaze calm and commanding. She didn't look like someone seeking a hug. She looked like someone ready to deliver a verdict. "The river does not forget, Kofi," she said, and her voice carried the weight of the tides. "And the water does not lie." She turned her eyes toward her sisters, and the temperature in the air dropped 10 degrees. The fish that had formed her bridge did not return to the water. They remained hovering in the air, thousands of glowing eyes watching the traitors. The sisters tried to run, but the mud beneath their feet suddenly turned into a sticky, watery trap, anchoring them to the spot. The reckoning they had feared for a year had finally arrived, and the entire village was about to witness the true power of the girl they had allowed to be discarded. The chief stepped forward, his voice trembling as he addressed the radiant figure. "Empress of the waters, we have suffered in your absence. Our nets are empty and our spirits are dry. What must we do to earn the river's mercy?" Nia looked at the starving people, her heart still filled with the compassion she had fought to keep in the kingdom below. "The river is merciful to the innocent," she declared, pointing a glowing finger at Kura and Mala. "But it has no room for those who hide daggers behind smiles. Today the water will speak the truth that was silenced a year ago. Today you will see exactly what happened on the night of the crimson moon." As she spoke, the water in the river began to rise, forming a massive liquid screen in the air, preparing to show the village the memory of the betrayal. The massive screen of liquid light suspended in the air began to shimmer, vibrating with the resonance of Nia's power. The villagers stood paralyzed, their eyes wide as the water began to play back the events of that fateful night. Like a living dream, the image of Kura and Mala appeared, their faces twisted with a malice that was now visible to everyone. The village watched in collective horror as the sisters lured Nia to the devil's throat and delivered the cold, calculated shove that sent her into the abyss. There was no room for denial, no space for lies. The truth was written in the very substance of the river. When the vision faded, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over Oru, followed quickly by a roar of indignation from the people who had been deceived for so long. Kura and Mala fell to their faces in the mud, wailing and begging for mercy. "It was the moon! The crimson moon made us do it!" Kura cried out, her voice cracking with terror. But Nia did not move. She looked down at them with eyes that held the cold neutrality of the deep sea. "The moon only reveals what is already in the heart," Nia said, her voice echoing across the banks. "You took my life because you wanted my crown, but the only crown you earned was one of shame. You starved this village to feed your vanity. The river has judged you, and the river does not accept apologies written in the blood of the innocent." The sisters looked to their mother, Xena, but even she had turned away, unable to face the supernatural wrath her greed had birthed. Nia raised her hand, and the Great Azure River responded with a thunderous roar. The water surged forward, but it did not flood the village. Instead, it moved like a liquid serpent, coiling around Kura and Mala. It did not drown them. Instead, it began to pull the very essence of their beauty away. Their silk robes dissolved into grey silt, and their skin became rough and scaly like the bottom feeders of the stagnant pools. "Since you loved the darkness of the river's throat, you shall live in the shadows," Nia declared. The water dragged the sisters into the river, where they were transformed into 2 small grey mud crabs, destined to scuttle in the dark and clear the rot from the riverbed for 100 years. Justice was not a sword. It was a transformation that forced them to serve the land they had tried to destroy. As the sisters vanished into the depths, the curse that had plagued Oru was finally lifted. The river instantly turned into a brilliant, sparkling sapphire, and millions of fish returned in a spectacular display of silver and gold, jumping high into the air as if celebrating a grand victory. The crops in the field stood tall and green within minutes, and the bellies of the people were filled with the sudden abundance of the harvest. Prince Kofi approached Nia, his heart overflowing with a love that had been tested by time and grief. He knelt before her, not as a prince to a subject, but as a man to a queen. "Nia, you are the soul of this land. Will you stay and lead us? Will you be the queen of Oru as you are the queen of the waves?" Nia looked at the prince and then at the village that had once cast her out. She saw the faces of the children and the elderly, and she felt the pulse of the river beneath her feet. "I will stay," she promised, "but the Oru of old is dead. We shall build a kingdom where kindness is the currency, and the river is our sanctuary. No one shall go hungry, and no one shall be silenced." The celebration that followed lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. Nia and Kofi were wed on a platform made of living coral that rose from the water, and the spirit of the river itself blessed their union with a rain of pearls. Under Nia's reign, Oru became the greatest empire the continent had ever seen, a place of peace, magic, and boundless wealth. As we reach the conclusion of this legendary tale, let us remember that the depths of the water may be dark, but they can never hide the light of a pure soul. Nia was drowned in jealousy, but she rose in glory because she chose forgiveness over hate. Her story serves as a timeless reminder that karma is a current that eventually brings everything back to where it belongs. If you have been moved by Nia's journey from the shadows to the crown, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Your presence in our community ensures that these stories of justice and wonder continue to flow to every corner of the world. Join us for our next adventure, and until then, may your heart be as clear as the Great Azure River. The legacy of the Fish Queen lived on for generations. It is said that even today, if you sit quietly by the banks of a great river and hum a low melodic tune, the fish will gather at your feet in memory of the maiden who wore the silver scales. The people of Oru never forgot the lesson they learned, that the smallest act of kindness can move the heavens, and the greatest betrayal can be washed away by the tides of time. The river continues to flow, carrying the song of Nia to the sea, reminding everyone that even in the deepest drowning, there is always the possibility of a golden return. Thank you for listening, and may your own story be one of resilience and triumph.